Stan, and I'm so happy to be here today and to be with all of you. Thank you for taking time from your schedule to be a part of this. Um, and what a kind introduction from Julie. She is a person for whom I also have a lot of respect. And there's just a lot of staff throughout ACF and the Office of Family Assistance that it's a real privilege to work here and be a part of the work. And I hope some of that comes through in the ways that we serve you. We really want the best for you and for the people that you serve, and we'll try to be as responsive as we can. Let's see. I don't know if I have control of the slides or not. If that's an
I think
option.
that Steve does.
Okay.
Steve.
So let's go to the next slide, Steve. So that's a picture of me, and that's how my name is spelled. And this picture was taken before March of last year because it's a selfie that I took in my office, and I haven't been to the office in quite some time. I am coming to you from my home, and my home is in the ancestral lands of the Manahoac people. I honestly don't know very much about them. And according to Wikipedia, they disappeared from the historical record after 1728. Even so, I'm aware that the land I'm on has been land that's been occupied by others before me. And I think that causes me to aspire to be a better steward of the land so that it might be sustained, so that others that will occupy it in the future will also find value in it here. As Julie mentioned, if you want to get a sense of sort of the region in which I live, my virtual background is a photo of Bears Den Overlook, which is a place that I went hiking with my family, and there's sort of an outcropping that you climb up to and gives you a nice overlook, and that was a few weeks ago. So it's good to be here, and I look forward to sharing with you today. I'll be focusing primarily on some of ACF's and OFA's responses to the COVID pandemic and guidance that we've issued in relation to that. I've talked about some of that before, so some of you may find that a little bit redundant. I'll also spend a few minutes talking about the murdered and missing Native American framework, which has been issued by ACF, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, so stay tuned. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll begin with guidance that we've provided in response to COVID-19. So the first written guidance that we issued is a program instruction, and I'm not sure that if when we share these, the PowerPoint, if it's hyperlinked. I tried to hyperlink it, but had difficulty, but the number is there for you. And it's a program instruction that was written for both states and tribes and covers some of the flexibilities. I want to highlight a few things from it, and then I'll pause and take questions if there are questions. So let's go to the next slide. And so one thing that I want you to be aware of is that anytime you make a revision to your plan, it requires an amendment. And there is a regulatory requirement that says that the amendment has to be made 30 days in advance. But we at OFA want to be as responsive as we can, because we know that some of you have wanted to make some adjustments to your plan so that you can be more responsive to the communities that you serve. And we've wanted to turn that around very quickly. And so the way in which we're doing that is we're recommending that you seek preliminary approval from ACF by sending an email to your regional point of contact and explaining the change that you want to make. And it's likely that in addition to email, you'll have a phone conversation and be able to sort out sort of more precisely what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And then your regional point of contact will provide preliminary approval in a reply email that makes it very explicit. Yes, we're approving, we're granting preliminary approval for you, and then we'll specify what it is that we're approving. And then there still needs to be a formal amendment submitted, and we'll send you a formal approval in response, and we'll grant the approval. We'll call it retroactive approval because it's sort of acknowledging that it's not exactly following the regulatory requirements to a T, but we're doing the best we can so that we can be accommodating, because we want you to be responsive to your communities. For 477, the process will look very similar, but instead of contacting us directly, you'll want to contact your Bureau of Indian Affairs Awarding Official Technical Representative, or AOTR, and work with them, and we'll similarly do things via email and follow up with a formal written approval in a timely manner. So that's one of the things that we provided in the guidance that's a little bit different from how we've operated historically, and we hope you find that helpful. It's probably just we're not going to make this an operation or practice for all amendments from here on, but in response to COVID, where we want to be responsive and we want to support you as much as we can, it's the way that we'd like to continue to work. So let's go to the next slide. So many of you, I'm sure, have had concerns about the ability to work to meet work participation requirements, especially when places that TANF participants may be going to acquire work experience may be closed due to the pandemic. And so you're wondering if the places where people go to do work are not open, or there's no possibility for a person to accomplish their work hours, because doing so would mean being with other people, and that can't be done. We want you to be aware that you should make your first priority the safety and well-being of all your people, meaning the staff that make up the employees in your own program, as well as the families and people that they're serving through TANF. So that's the first priority. And when you make that your first priority, it's a possibility that you will not be meeting your work participation rate. And while we have no authority to change or to waive the work participation rate requirement, we do have the authority to grant relief from any penalty that would result from not being able to make the work participation requirement. And we as an agency have stated publicly and intend to exercise our authority to provide penalty relief as a result of COVID-19 to the maximum extent possible. So there's not so much to do something right now in terms of seeking a waiver, but there will come a point in time that you may have the opportunity to seek relief from your penalty due to the natural disaster that we've been living with. So let's go to the next page from there. So those are a couple of the highlights. The past two slides have been a couple of highlights from the first guidance that we issued. Then we issued some additional guidance on July 22nd, and this was issued just for tribes. and it paid particular attention to non-recurring short-term benefits, but it also address time limits, which I think is important. So let's talk briefly about both those things and go to the next slide. So you negotiate with, when you established your plan, you negotiated the time limits with ACF, and you would have also negotiated what the exemption percentage is, the percentage of people that can be exempted from time limits. And it's possible as a result of COVID that the percentage of people that you've exempted is greater than whatever it is that you negotiated, most likely 20%. And we're treating this the same way as we are work participation rates. So we intend to exercise our authority to grant a reasonable cause exception to a penalty of a tribe's failure to comply with the maximum exemption rate to the time limit on federally funded assistance. And we intend to exercise that authority to the maximum extent possible. Again, I think one of the main messages is that you need to put the safety and well-being of your staff and the communities that you're serving first, and then from there find ways to do what it is that you do. So let's go to the next slide, because we also paid a lot of attention throughout this program instruction to non-recurring short-term benefits. So non-recurring short-term benefits is something that we have an acronym for, NRST. And when one of the things that you have flexibility as a tribe to do is define what it means to be a needy family. And so then what it means to be a needy family for a family to receive a non-recurring short-term benefit may be different than how you define needy for a family that receives TANF cash assistance. And in fact, sometimes that would make sense because you may be providing the non-recurring short-term benefits so that they don't become a TANF cash assistance. But in providing a non-recurring short-term benefit, there's three things that you should be aware of. It's designed to deal with a specific crisis situation or episode of need. It's not intended to meet recurrent or ongoing needs, and it will not extend beyond 4 months. So it is limited in time for how much you give it. In terms of the first criteria there, it is designed to deal with a specific crisis situation or episode of need. One of the things that I think we communicated pretty clearly in the program instruction is that it's not sufficient to say that the pandemic is a crisis for all people, or even that the lockdowns, which may be implemented within your state or within your tribe, that in itself is not a specific crisis. But a crisis is specific to a family. So when I think about federal staff, I live in Northern Virginia. Denise lives in Denver, Colorado, and Julie lives in the San Francisco area. And so we're living in different places. We've all endured this pandemic, and to varying degrees, all of our communities have placed restrictions that affect our movement. And Julie's probably the most strongly affected because California has been quite strict in in how they want to minimize the movement of people and the spread of COVID-19. Even though all of us have been affected and experienced those things, we are very, very fortunate in that we've all been able to maintain our employment. And so while we've been impacted to some extent by the pandemic, we've not been impacted in a way that affects our income, and therefore the pandemic in itself is not a situation or episode of need for us. And it's also going to be important for tribes when people do, when they are eligible for the benefits, that there be documentation in place that substantiates that the people receiving the benefits are in fact eligible based on their specific crisis or episode of need. I want to pause there. Yes, I'm pausing now because there may be questions that you have, and I want to take a moment to allow for that.
Thank you. We did get one question in the chat. The question is, are there any tribes who've identified families eligible for NRST? And if so, what were the circumstances that qualified them? And I'm assuming that the question was asked in the context again of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a couple of things that come to mind. And I think that I became aware of these because of amendments that we approved. There were some tribes that adjusted their eligibility criteria upwards for families so that they could grant a non-recurring short-term benefit. And one that specifically comes to mind is that they created a tribe created an amendment because they wanted to provide for those that had lost their job and had lost employment. A casino had closed, and people were being furloughed, and they wanted to know if non-recurring short-term benefits could be provided for something like that, and they can't. I don't know, Denise, or Julie, if there's any other thoughts that come to mind to you in responding to that.
I can think of multiple circumstances, either families who temporarily lost their jobs, families who whose children were having to be homeschooled, and the family didn't have the technology to the access to technology to facilitate their children's participation in school. So non-recurrent short-term benefit to assist families who couldn't afford the tools that their children needed to attend school. That's another, I think, circumstance. Families who've been impacted by recently in California, the wildfires. So families whose homes were damaged, they may have received non-recurrent short-term benefits to temporarily move into an apartment or a hotel until they could safely move back into their home. Those are some in the context of both natural disasters and COVID that I can think of. Denise, can you think of any others?
Not related to non-recurring short-term benefits. It's been more related to eligibility for, because my familiarity is more with the 477 tribes and those that integrate TANF into 477. So we've seen a few amendments come through with adjustments, but not necessarily related to non-recurring short-term benefits.
I saw another question in the chat box.
Are families eligible to apply more than once?
Right.
Say at month 5.
And so the conversation that I've had around this issue with the director of policy on the state side, and I think that it would hold true for tribes as well, is that you can provide a non-recurrent short-term benefit, but it would likely be separated by some time span. So not necessarily granting them a non-recurring short-term benefits for months 1 through 4, and then 5, they reapply and get another benefit for another 4 months. There would likely be some separation in terms of time, and the benefit would likely be different as well. So a person that receives a benefit initially for help with the utility bill might later down the road receive help with a car repair or something like that. But typically it wouldn't be the same benefit being extended beyond 4 months.
Any other questions for Stan related to non-recurrent short-term benefits? You're welcome to enter your question into the chat, or you can signal to Steve in the chat that you'd like to be unmuted to ask your question. I'm not seeing any, so
okay. Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Thank you.
And what time am I? What time do I have till?
You have about 2 more minutes, Stan.
Wow. So here's a slide showing regional office and BIA context, and that's particularly important for doing any of the policy work that we've just talked about, amendments, concern about work participation rates, and time limits and such. So that doesn't hardly give me any time, but I do want to talk about missing or murdered Native Americans. So let's go to the next slide for that. It's a framework, and let's go to the next slide. I'll be as transparent as I can with this. The United States faces a crisis that requires the attention of leaders at all levels of government in collaboration with Native American communities, because the dramatic number of American Indians and Alaska Natives who have suffered from the tragedy of individuals going missing or being murdered is unacceptable. An executive order was established, and it established the Lady of Justice Task Force. And it's comprised of the ANA commissioner here at ACF, Jeannie Hovland, as well as an assistant secretary at BIA, and also representatives at Department of Justice. And the executive order was signed by Donald Trump. And so we kind of find ourselves in the midst of a transition here. And it's hard for me to personally have a strong sense about the extent to which this is an issue that's being driven by the administration, or whether it's a grassroots felt need among tribes. And so in many ways, while I'm describing this framework, I would like for folks to consider it an invitation, and an invitation to consider whether it makes sense for TANF to be a part of this, and an invitation to see if some of the ideas that I'm going to talk very briefly about resonate with folks in tribal communities, to help us know, is this an area where we should continue to provide technical assistance? Let's go to the next slide. So where does it connect with ACF programs? The rates of victimization among Native Americans is just unbelievably high. And I don't know exactly how they defined it for the survey that was done by the Department of Justice, but 84.3% of women and 81.6% of men report having experienced violence in their lifetime. And that's astonishing. It's astounding to me. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around that, because that means that it's more likely, if you're Native American, that you have experienced violence than that you haven't. And where it connects with ACF programs is that ACF programs offer human services that address the social determinants of health. And we know that if people are in healthy relationships, if they're more economically stable, if they have a safety net, that they're at less risk of victimization than if they don't have those things. So let's go to the next slide. How does it connect to TANF? TANF, if you're working and serving a Native American person, you should be aware that the person that you're serving has probably experienced violence at some point in their life. Just given, I mean, when I going back to those stats on the previous slide, if you just let those wash over you, it's astounding to think the rates, the prevalence of Native Americans that have experienced violence. So if we're working with them, then it points to the need for us to be providing trauma-informed care so that they can be served with compassion and for an appreciation of some of the things that they may have experienced in their life. Number two is that TANF funds may be used for preventive activities. In particular, our purposes 3 and 4 are to prevent and reduce the incidence of out-of-wedlock pregnancies and encourage the formation and maintenance of two-parent families. So it's very realistic to imagine if you're working with teens and helping them to think about developing strong and healthy relationships, or if you're working with adults, young adults, or couples, and thinking about what it means to form a strong and stable family, that you can be talking about, well, what are the red flags to unhealthy things, and what are the circumstances and the relationships in which a person should be particularly cautious, and what can be done to prevent people from going missing or people from being murdered. Even saying that word, it's such a strong word. It's hard in some ways to talk about these things. But again, I'm just putting all of this out there, and I would like to offer it as an invitation. If these are issues that resonate with you and with people in your tribe or in your community that you're serving, I just want to invite you to let us know about that, so that we can provide technical assistance, so we can come alongside you in ways that are going to be meaningful, so that you feel as though you have a partner in the work that needs to be done. So that brings us to the last slide, which is simply questions and answers, and we're 5 minutes over. So I don't know what to say about that, but I'll turn it back to Julie so that she can facilitate whatever transition comes next.
Thanks so much, Stan. We did have a question about resources or training around the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people and this particular initiative, and we'd be happy to provide follow-up information and resources. And for any questions we don't get to in the sessions, we will be doing that. We're compiling kind of a parking lot list of questions and requests, and we will be conducting follow-up after the meeting to ensure that you get those resources. Please join me in thanking Stan from wherever you are. Thank you, Stan. Yay. We've got a quick break, 15 minutes. We are running over, which we probably will today. That's been the MO, 3 or 4 minutes over. But please take a 15-minute break and join us back here at, it's 10:36, so 15 minutes from now, about 10:10. And the next session will be identifying and planning for employment opportunities in a COVID-19 reality. I think you really want to join us because that is a critical issue right now that folks I know are struggling with. And we've got a great panel to present several models on how to do this effectively in the context of COVID. Thank you, everyone.